partners from Gold Enterprises to lead us now on the third part of the Authentic Diversity work. So glad that you're with us today.
All right, welcome back to the next stage of our conversation in regards to the Authentic Diversity Audit, our strategic planning phase. Big old scary strategic planning. We hear this a lot in various industries. There's a number of different ways to do it. It was our goal to make sure that we built a very nice, smooth bridge from the actual audit process into the so what of this work. This is where you all start to take ownership of the outcomes of the audit and how you want to see things implementing and rolled out over time. The reason why it is not wise for consultants of any sort to necessarily come in and just draft a strategic plan is because you all are the experts of your synod, your congregations, your experiences, and so we would be too far removed to make sure that a strategic plan was written that would take root, take hold, and blossom. So given that, we're going to just take you through what this process will look like next. So I'm really excited to get into this so what, the so what piece of things. What's next? How can you all take this back to your congregations, okay? Because again, remember the audit outcome specifically has for some connection here. How do we make connection to our individual congregations, our laypersons, and what does this mean for their day-to-day work? Okay. So, strategic planning, what in the world is it? We hear the language a lot. There's a number of different ways to do it well. There is no one right way to do it, but this is how we think about strategic planning. It's this process of identifying these elements of a blueprint that will help you all accomplish the goals that you set out. And so it requires you to create those goals, create objectives, and then think about the decisions on how you're going to reach them. Now, let me give you a great example of this, one that I've shared with the Synod Council, I've shared with Bishop, I've shared with a number of people, but this can help you to kind of think about strategic planning if you've never done it before, okay? Let's say, in consultation with Gold Enterprises, we talk with Synod Council and say, you know what? It's time to move Synod, Milwaukee Synod, we're going to Hawaii, y'all. Let's go, we're going. We have decided in our 26 years of DEI experience that it would be better for all of us to be in Hawaii, okay? All right? So, if we decided that that should be one of the big goals of the Synod, then we also have to think about how we're going to get there. What's the timeline for getting there? What's the process? How are we going to roll this out? Some folks want to cruise, some folks want to take a plane. What are we doing here, right? And so we have to really map out the steps of getting us from here to lovely Hawaii, okay? That's what we're going to be doing with this work in particular, is how are we going to get to the place that we say we want to go to? What's going to be the vision? What's the work? What are the milestones that tell us we're going in the right direction? These are all things that we need to do as part of the strategic planning process. Now, as I mentioned before, there's lots of different ways to do strategic planning. There's no one right way, there's many approaches. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Andrea Rodriguez, who's part of my team, will be working or co-facilitating with me in regards to the strategic planning process using the design thinking method. And the reason why we like design thinking is because actually it comes from the arts. It comes from literature, music, art, science, where we really get to think about iterations of things that could work, okay? So we may start thinking about, yes, we want to get to Hawaii, but at first we think, oh, well, Lisa and I may want to swim partially there. We like to swim. But other folks might be like, no, I'm not doing that. You need to put me on a very luxurious cruise ship to get there, and I'm going to be comfortable on my way. We all have to think about what is the process by which we're going to get to where we're going, and the opportunity for the Strategic Planning Committee to work together to what's called ideate, create ideas, various ideas, because oftentimes when you create various ideas of how to get where you're going, there are going to be pieces of those ideas that absolutely will not work, and also pieces that will. and what happens when you put them all together, okay? So it's a process of sketching out, prototyping, even testing concepts and ideas of how to get yourselves from where you are to where you want to be. And this design thinking process is not just for one goal, but it's for various goals that we have suggested in the audit, okay? So we'll ideate around those particular areas. So imagine the design thinking process for each of the 6 major themes that we presented earlier. That's what we'll be guiding you through for this process. Okay. So the goal here is to really see what's going on, which hopefully the audit helped to illuminate a lot of that. And then engaging together around what does this mean for our work. And then imagining what could be solutions, prototyping those solutions to figure out what works and what doesn't, try it out, and then we start the process over again. That will be the strategic planning process. Okay. Now, given this, I think what's really important about design thinking, again, is to think about what's involved. What's involved with that strategic planning process. Now, of course, there are elements that are crucial to this work. Of course, people. People, again, like I mentioned before, Gold Enterprises doesn't lock ourselves into an office and we write a strategic plan and send it over to you. We need the heavy engagement and involvement in regards to this work, which we'll get into in just a minute with your next table discussion. So the involvement of you all. We're also thinking about process, not just product, okay? And then we're also thinking about the purpose. Why are we doing what we do? What is our why? What is our why? Usually that's theologically based, but even as we talk about this here in this space, everyone will come to that from a theologically different space. And what does that mean for our individual whys, okay? All right, and so like I mentioned before, when we think about this design thinking process, we develop ideas. We plan on how we're going to execute those ideas. We actually launch them. We don't let them get dormant. That's where cadence comes in, timing, right? Timing, don't let anything sit for too long or else it will sit there for a very long time. It will be forgotten, in fact. Launch, iterate on these ideas again and again. That's where we have that continuous improvement process where, yes, let's try something out. If it doesn't work, we tweak it and we try it again. I think to this point, when it comes to the iteration piece of the strategic planning process, I would suggest that one of the biggest barriers to change, adjustment, even pursuing some of the goals that we've set out for you in this audit is perfectionism. We don't want to do it unless we think we can do it perfectly and get it exactly right. And that's not quite how this works. Okay? That's why we use the continuous improvement plan of this worked decently, but we know there were some flaws. How can we correct and move forward, right? We don't want to buy into the notion, which actually comes directly from white supremacy, around it must be perfect or it's not. It doesn't have any value. It's worthless if it's not perfect, okay? We can be imperfect allies as long as we're falling and failing forward, adjusting and moving forward, okay? And then building in the sustainability of the changes. One of the things that Dr. Ingerfield and I will know that we were not successful if we come back in a year or two and we find that it kind of looks like we didn't do a thing, right? You know, kind of like my house when I clean. And my 2 boys are there for 5 minutes. It's like, what did I do all weekend? Nothing, right? We don't want that to happen, right? So with that, we want to make sure that we see sustained change. That means that it's going to need to be baked in. It's going to need to be baked into your protocols, policies, procedures, documents. What we don't want to see is personality-driven anti-racism. Personality-driven anti-racism. When you have people that are allies and champions of this work, but the second there comes some type of change to them, their leadership, their livelihood, anything, those initiatives walk right out the door with them. We don't want to see that, okay? So that's where the sustainability comes in. All right, so look at this lovely, colorful quadrant here. This gives us a little bit of work that we're going to be doing at each of our tables, but I want to share with you this priority quadrant, because what we found, especially as my team does this type of work when it comes to authentic diversity and inclusion audits, is that there's this sense of overwhelm. Once we deliver that report, it's, they gave us 80 suggestions. Where do we begin, right? Well, given that, what we've done is created what's called a priority quadrant. And this priority quadrant helps us to think about how are we going to prioritize all these things that Gold Enterprises idealistically say we need to do. Because we realize, of course, that it's not possible to implement all changes all at the same time and have them be sustainable and effective. And so given that, we use this priority quadrant, and we're going to be asking you to think about this through your own lenses at your tables in regards to how are we going to prioritize the suggestions that were shared with you earlier this morning. So let me walk you through this quadrant here. In the red in the top left corner, the first question that helps us to prioritize is, what should we do now? What should we do now? Meaning, what should be near the top of our priority list? Maybe we're already working on it and we just need to go ahead and push it across the finish line, but what's something that we need to do right now? Right now. Number 2 in the top right blue quadrant, what should we do next? What should we do next? Meaning, what has a prerequisite before it can be successful? Maybe a couple of things need to happen before it can even be viable to make it happen, right? So something may have a prerequisite, that's okay, but what should we do next in the sequence? Third, bottom left quadrant in the green, what should we do last? What should we do last? Meaning, what has numerous steps in order to take action? Maybe there's 10 things that need to occur before you can get that one last thing off the ground. That's okay. That's why we sequence all of this out. But what should we do last? And then fourth, in the yellow, bottom right, what is not ours to do? What is not ours to do? Okay? And we really love the feedback that we got when sharing with the Synod Council around this particular question, because again, this question doesn't necessarily mean that we don't want to do this or that it shouldn't be done. But what it does mean is that there's something that's important to us. However, it may not be our role as the Synod. And we also support more equipped individuals as they bring this to fruition, right? Maybe someone else has the expertise in this particular area, and maybe we want to funnel support to those individuals, but we still want to see it happen, right? So how do we prioritize that? That may land in that fourth quadrant, okay? And then the fifth quadrant, the fifth question down at the bottom, which I think is really important. It works part and parcel with quadrants 1, 2, and 3. So the red, the blue, and the green kind of connect to this last one. Number 5, what is never complete? What is never complete? Meaning, what are the action items in quadrants 1, 2, and 3, but they require ongoing work. They're never finished. We will be working on this constantly until we're out of here, y'all. But it's something that we will be working on forever, right? And so given that, this hopefully is a great tool that will help you to think through how would you prioritize the work. We also realize that we're all not going to land in the same place. That's why we need your feedback and support on what this looks like, because this does build a direct connection to our next steps with the strategic planning team. And so given that, we're going to allow time for you all to think about this quadrant, numbers 1 through 5, as you would see some of those priorities. So let me go through some of the things to expect, okay? You're probably wondering, okay, so we're here. We're here at Synod Assembly, so how does this interact or play with nicely what happens in our congregations, okay? Here's your congregation's role in the work. We would ask that rostered ministers and lay leaders return to your congregations and garner more information on your congregants' priorities. What do you think that they're prioritizing? Hear from them, listen to them. And providing this feedback that you garner from your congregations, that's going to be integral to this next step in the strategic planning work, okay? And so what we're doing, you all will receive, as I've confirmed with Bishop and Mary, you all will receive some follow-up information to this assembly. Part of that follow-up information is actually a form where you will get to respond based on the feedback that you get from your individual congregations as to those 5 different areas. Okay? You will get to respond via that form. My team will collapse all that information, and then that will be useful as we start the strategic planning meetings. But again, this is your opportunity to get engaged, involved, and I think it's a great entree for our rostered ministers and lay leaders to share with your congregants, what in the world are we doing? How do we make sure that they are still connected to this work if they're not able to be present this weekend? Okay? So what we're asking is you respond to that form, and we're giving you a couple weeks. Again, cadence is really important, timing is really important. So we're giving you until Sunday, June 18th to follow up with that work. And also too, you see in that form, there's an email, info@goldenterprisesllc.com. If there's stuff that isn't covered in that very brief form, you can always email that over to our team and we'll collapse that together as well, okay? So that's what we're asking you all to do as you think here and think more broadly with your congregants, okay? All right, so this is what will happen. With our strategic planning committee, we'll have representatives for various roles, including laity and rostered ministers, and they will be participating as core members of the strategic planning team. And where necessary, of course, we'll need to break things down even further. We've seen this work with other organizations. Let's say, for example, you have your 6 major themes that we shared with you earlier this morning. There's been organizations we've worked with that broke down their subcommittees where there's a subcommittee that works on each of the 6, right? Whatever we deem best as far as our organizational process, but our goal is to make sure that we divide this work up and give our attention to that, especially for those that may lean towards some areas or others. They have an opportunity to work where they feel their gifts lie as well. Okay. All right, and then from there, based on the congregational feedback that you all will send to us by the 18th, we'll get that feedback, and that will help with our stepwise process with the planning committee, the subcommittees, so forth. And that's when we will start to draft our individual plans for each of the prioritized action items, okay? So, given that, no, we're not going to be writing a long thesis or dissertation, but we will have stepwise plans for the 6 areas that we shared with you earlier today. Okay? And we need your involvement in order to make that happen. Okay. All right, let me give you an example of how we have done this in the past, just a concrete example of how we've organized this. So within that strategic plan, no, we're not writing a long thesis or a long dissertation, but what we will be doing is providing some elements for each identified priority. Okay? So there may be a particular focus area. What's our goal within that focus area? How are we going to execute a plan around that goal? What are the steps that we support? We're also going to talk about perceived obstacles. Now, I've participated in a lot of strategic planning processes, and it really becomes very toxically positive when it comes to the execution of the action plan, because it's an assumption that there will be few to no obstacles. That is not us. we realize this work is very real, it affects real lives, and we know that there will always be challenges and there's never a perfect plan. And so given that, this provides us an opportunity to think about those perceived obstacles, or even obstacles that we hope don't happen, but we want to be prepared and ready for them. The resources that are needed, and again, those aren't always money. Sometimes it is a partnership with someone. Maybe it's a collaboration outside of your congregation or outside of the Synod. It could be anything that's a resource. Time, talent, treasure, it could be any of those things, right? So identifying what resources are needed to make sure this focus area is successful, creating a timeline for when we're going to do this, because remember, all these timelines have to play nicely with one another. And then how are we going to hold ourselves accountable for this, all right? I've seen action plans that were really beautiful, they were glossy, they had pretty colors, and then nobody was accountable, and I came back 2 years later, and nothing happened. Okay? So how are we going to hold ourselves accountable, even if that's, we're going to report each year at Assembly, or we're going to report to each other in each quarter, or maybe we're going to collaborate with Pastor Afi on something on this particular date. Whatever that looks like, what does accountability look like for making sure that actually happens? Okay, so this is just a template for how we're going to move forward. And we, of course, can tweak this template as we see necessary. Okay? All right, continuous improvement. This is something I've mentioned before, but I just want to make sure that I underline it once again. Part of the ideation process in strategic planning is being very comfortable with failing forward. So Maya Angelou, I love this particular quote from her where she says, "I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better." Okay. Along this process, even as you're executing your action plan, you're going to garner more information, learn more things, which means then you may have to tweak things quite a bit, right? If you're driving down a road trying to get to your destination, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's a detour. That doesn't mean you can't get where you're going. That just means we're gonna have to adjust along the way. And that's exactly what happens as we learn new information that's applicable to the work, okay? So we're gonna adjust as we move forward. And then I would say, when we come to this next piece, whoops, too quickly. When we come to this next piece, I wanna make sure we're ready for our table discussions. With these discussions, again, you get to start the process of thinking about those 5 quadrant questions. Those questions should be on each of your tables along with those 5 questions we discussed earlier. You'll have an opportunity to talk about these once again and start priming the pump around these particular questions, okay? You'll have facilitators there with you, note takers as well. Dr. Ingerfield and I, quite transparently, we have purposely not wandered around tables like we do as usually as teachers and professors because it freaks people out. So we're not going to do that. However, if needed, wave at us and we can come over to you for sure. But we try not to be too creepy walking around your tables. So please have those very candid conversations with one another. If you get stuck on an idea or anything that we've presented during this time together, wave us down and we're happy to come over to you. But you'll have an opportunity to think about those 5 quadrant questions that are on your round tables right now, okay? So with that, I'll move us forward. Just a quick reminder, the very same dialogue questions that, touchstones for dialogue, they're gonna apply this time as well. We're gonna practice once again those touchstones for dialogue. Again, we don't need to agree, but we do need to understand as we're thinking about prioritizing those 6 major themes we talked about earlier today, okay? All right, Dr. Ingerfield, is there anything that I skipped over? I'm good? Okay, I'm good, thank you. So with that, we will yield the rest of our time for you all to discuss this particular quadrant. Hopefully there are no questions, but again, like I mentioned before, flag us down and we're happy to come over to you. All right?
Remind them to turn in notes.
Oh, yes. And also to Dr. Caldwell, thank you. If you have notes, please don't forget to turn those in to us. Those are extremely helpful in our process, so please don't forget to turn those in to us. Should they bring them here to us or, okay, great. Sounds good. All right, you can bring them up to us. That would be completely fine, but we want to collapse all that information together because that's useful for next steps, okay? All right, so we'll have about, I think I have in my notes about 20 minutes. Will we still be on schedule, Bishop? Okay.
We're going to give you 25 minutes.
Even better.
Conversation. And if you think your handwriting is not legible enough to submit written notes, if you quickly write them up and send them, can we send them to the Assembly website or email? Assembly@gmselca.org. That would be another way to submit your comments. Just write them in an email, submit them in written form. Assembly@gmselca.org. 25 minutes. Go.